Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. And as always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. I'm doing this al fresco today, Rick. It's such a nice day. I said, I'm taking the podcast outside. It's like when you were in school and the teacher said, let's take class outside today. I'm like, I'm taking this podcast outside.
I was going to ask you if the teacher allowed you to go outdoors today for your recess. So that's nice. Yeah, it looks good out there.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Very nice day. We got a lot to get to.
Oh, we've got plenty to get to. We'll start with the Reds. And Skinny, the ball club is playing well right now, but that's not the story this week, unfortunately. It is actually about a 19-year-old William Hendon who ran onto the field during Tuesday night's Reds-Indians game. As he was being chased by the cops, he stopped and landed a backflip before being tased. He was released from jail after his court appearance on Wednesday. He's facing criminal trespassing and obstructing official business charges. What do you have on our guy, William Hendon, the former St. X catcher and first baseman?
So a couple of things. Initially, when that event happened, I think for me, it's more the backstory I'm about to tell that fascinated me more than anything else. Well, there he goes. Yay! And according to John Sadak, he's been tased. That's my favorite. Listen, you know I'm not a huge John Sadak fan, but I thought the play-by-play of that whole thing was really good.
Yeah, so I've mentioned this before. I think last year we talked about a football situation. A lot of people are questioning whether or not the taser is too much, if that's too much force for a situation like this. I have a very different take on that. I'll let you go first, though.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, it is a dumb idea to ever run. In fact, if you're shot, it wouldn't even hurt me if you're shot in that circumstance.
That's where I was going. We need to start shooting these people.
Yes,
they will stop
correct.
doing it if you just kill one. Just
correct.
Shoot him.
No, honestly, I think it's ridiculous. I don't get it. Although I'm going to get to some backstory here in a second with this. It's really interesting to me. So whatever, I will say this, Rick, he's really lucky that on that backflip, all he hit was the cop's hat. If he'd have struck that cop's face with his foot, brother, it would have been game on.
Well, he's also lucky he's not in Louisville. That hat's probably $120. They would have taken him to jail and all types of things.
No, he didn't rip his pants. That was the good part. The policeman did not rip his pants.
I think the hat's more expensive.
So when this first went down yesterday, I didn't really think anything of it other than the event itself. Then some phone calls started coming my way. And a friend of mine says, do you know who that kid's related to? I'm like, no. He says, does Judge Sylvia Hendon ring a bell? I go, sure. I remember who she was. He said, well, that's the grandson. I'm like, oh, okay. That's backstory part number one. So number two, initially I see his full name as William Hendon. And then the guy I was talking to said, the family's got some money. He said, I'm not so sure we went to high school. And I said, I don't know, maybe St. X. And I all of a sudden go, boom, I did a couple of their baseball games where a Will Hendon played. I looked him up on, what is that PBR recruiting site or whatever, where he's got his photo. And I'm like, my gosh, that's him.
Yeah.
So then today I come to find out, because it's always, why did the guy do it, right? What was the purpose, other than maybe getting his kicks or getting his jollies? And I don't know if this has been reported yet, but I was told, and maybe you've seen this report or heard it, that he was paid $5,000 from a group of friends to do that.
Okay, so that brings up another really good podcast question.
Exactly, it sure does.
Is it worth it? $5,000. Let's see. He's 19 years old. I did see that. He's like just 1 year out of high school.
Correct. That is correct. He's a sophomore.
$5,000 from your buddies. And here's the great thing about going to somewhere like St. X and being a rich kid in this area. Your buddies actually have $5,000 to pay you for a dare like this.
Correct. It was a bunch of buddies, so I don't know how much they each chipped in for him to do this. So I don't know what the charge itself is a misdemeanor. The way the charge was written.
Well, they had it as a felony, and then they changed it to a misdemeanor in court. Yeah.
So a misdemeanor means you're probably walking away with a minimal fine, right? And I don't know what this fine would be. $1,000, maybe, right? Maybe some court costs.
I don't know. I mean, especially if your grandma's a big prior judge, they usually kind of take care of their own in those situations. I can't imagine he's getting a heavy-handed punishment.
I'm trying to do this just from the logical,
is it worth it for us?
Yeah. Right. That's kind of where I'm getting at. So I was thinking, $1,000 for the misdemeanor. I don't know what the court cost would be. Let's just surmise $1,000-ish. I mean, if this cat cleared $3,000 and we found out that that's what he cleared from this, I think that opens up a whole new cottage industry of dudes running on the field for a price. At what price do you do it, Rick Broering?
It's a great question. I just Googled misdemeanor trespassing fine, a misdemeanor which is punishable by up to 1 year in jail and or a fine of up to $500. Well, we know he's not getting a year in jail.
Not going to jail, right.
If it's only $500, I hate to say it, but he kind of made a good decision. Well, how much does this affect you, like long term, getting your face splashed everywhere, having people know your name for doing something stupid? Does that matter in your opinion or not really?
Well, it would matter to me. That kind of stuff would matter to me. It really would. But maybe not for this guy. I mean, look, this is all a great story. We've all shared this story with our friends and buddies, right? We've all gotten strangely, even though we all deplore it, not all of us, but most sane people deplore it. We've gotten a big damn kick out of this, have we not?
Well, I mean, look, the kid got his own Cincy shirt now.
Right.
I mean, the way this is handled has been absolutely terrible for preventing it in the future.
Yes.
I mean,
correct.
if you watch this as a young kid right now, you're going, this kid's famous. He's gone viral. This is kind of what you want to do in today's day and age is get a viral clip, get a t-shirt about yourselves, be a legend amongst your friends. For a 19-year-old, it probably feels pretty cool right now.
And on your record, it's only a misdemeanor. So it's not like, you all of a sudden have to put down on a job application that you were once a felon, correct?
Right. I mean, who amongst us who hasn't had a misdemeanor once or twice,
That's knocked down some mailboxes once and got in trouble for that as a youth, as a misspent
right. So,
youth.
Man, I hate to say it, but yeah, I mean, you're kind of winning me. But that being said, I still think like the best way to prevent this forward is just start shooting them. Just shoot
I'm with
these.
you.
Have a sniper on top of the roof. Anyone who goes on the field to play in any sport, just kill them.
No, honestly, I mean, it's like all the public service messages before the game about foul balls going into the stands. And if there's a weather situation, what to do. It should be an announcement of attention fans. A reminder, if you run onto the field in tonight's game, you will be shot on sight. Thank you.
Oh, actually, I kind of have another idea I like. You know how I can't remember which team it is, but they have the freeze, that guy who beats everybody in the racism on the outfield wall. What if you just kept some dude in like a cage, like just some giant crazy dude from the state pen, and he's like, the barbarian is back there. And if anyone runs on the field, that's the game now. We're not watching the baseball game. We're watching the barbarian chase down this 19-year-old doing backflips, and he just beats the hell out of him like a gladiator scene in front of all of us. That'd be cool.
I like it. It's like the movie Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I used to have this idea back in my talk radio days of when reality TV was busting out. I said, one day we are going to see on television a show called Duel, where you're going to have people that are in prison and have life sentences. The way that they can get out is they fight. They start on point A, the other one starts on point B, and they have to fight to the death. And it'll be on live TV. It'll come one day.
Well, we've gone completely away from that with the current sensibilities, but like maybe we're going to get tired of the cancel culture and being so soft and sensitive that will be like the overcorrection as we go to your idea there of criminals fighting to the death on TV.
On TV, for sure.
Yeah, almost be like Scared Straight, just the extreme version.
Back to your original question, though. I just find this being foolish, to be quite frank.
I don't get it. I don't understand why it's fun or funny. Now I get like once we get the whole visual of the kid doing a backflip on a cop, that was a good experience for a guy running on the field in terms of entertainment value. But
I mean,
most of the time it's just annoying as hell. It takes up extra time. It takes away. It's like, come on, now we got to wait for you to get carried off the field. Everyone's like 3 people are going to cheer for you. Great. I do have a couple points about this though. One, Skinny, this kid, you're looking at him a little bit thicker. I read on his PBR site that he was a catching prospect, so not the most fleet of foot. He ran over a 7-second 60-yard dash. This was the guy that they challenged to run onto the field, their slowest friend. And by the way, how about him pulling off the backflip and landing it cleanly? That's impressive for a kind of chunky, slow dude.
No question. I thought that was a pretty athletic move. I mean, little guys like Ozzie Smith could pull those off back in the day, but not that guy. But he pulled it off. Honestly, other than, hitting the policeman's hat and knocking it off, he landed it 100%. That was almost a 10.
It was a clean backflip with good height on it. I mean, the jump was impressive. He must have really built up some leg strength during his catching days. That's what I'll say.
There you go. Maybe that was the case.
I have one more old man gripe about this too.
Yes.
The word streaker. Yes. I come from a time where words used to mean something. Streaker means you are naked, right? Why do we keep calling people running on the field streakers if they're clothed?
Yes, that's correct. And I heard that a few times the other night after this took place, and it was a pet peeve of mine of, no, he's not a streaker. A streaker is naked. And that was a thing back in the 70s where, in fact, there was a song called The Streak. Go look it up. And it was one of all our favorites back in the day.
Yeah. And now, William, if you want to run out there butt naked and bare your little willy while doing a backflip, then we'll be a little bit more impressed, man. That takes some real intestinal fortitude to do that for $5,000 for your buddies. But doing it fully clothed, not impressed.
And then the whole no shoes thing was interesting to me too.
That had to be for the backflip. He must be
I
like
guess
that must be a
yeah.
gymnast thing, a little more grip for the backflip, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. The Reds are 33-35 overall now, Skinny. They're 4-2 since we last spoke, a half game out of the third wild card spot in the National League, and tied with the Cubs and Cardinals for second place in the NL Central. They are all 7 games back of the Brewers, and the Pirates are just a half game back of those 3 teams. So everybody's jumbled up in the National League Central except for the Brewers, who actually come to town to play the Reds starting on Friday night.
I think they go to Milwaukee. I think they go to Milwaukee.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, that's correct. Reds go to Milwaukee. Thank you for correcting that. Jeimer Candelario, Skinny. He's the guy that has kind of been on my mind recently as I watched this team. He had 2 homers in Wednesday night's win over the Guardians. Get this stat. In the 37 games since he went 0 for 8 with 7 strikeouts in that 2-game stretch against the Rangers, he is now batting .292 with 9 homers and 23 RBIs. He has the highest average on the team at 243 overall. That's just for the entire season, not during that stretch now. Right. The entire season, he's at 243, highest average on the team, has the highest slugging percentage on the team at 473. I don't want to say I'm happy that the Reds had injuries that allowed Jeimer Candelario an extended time to play here and extra opportunities, but man, it's a good thing they didn't give up on this guy too early.
Yeah, and I don't think they were ever going to be honest with you. I mean, you signed him to a pretty lucrative deal.
3-year.
Yeah, I think you believed he was going to be, whether it was first base or third base or DH, somewhere in the lineup almost every day, because he hits lefties and righties about as equal and, had that value. And I guess the thing is he's got a back of the baseball card. And, again, his back of the baseball card isn't superstar. It's not even star. It's just quality pro. And here's the numbers he's probably going to put up. And he's now rounding towards that neighborhood of those numbers. But the Reds really need that. They need that power bat. And, going to get Noelvi Marte back in a couple of weeks as he started that rehab assignment in Louisville. Then it's going to come the question of, how are you going to fit all these guys in? Listen, Noelvi Marte is going to play third base. Ellie's going to play short. Noelvi's going to play short on days they want to give Ellie off, and they probably need to give Ellie some more days off. Spencer Steer will probably play first more often than not, and Candelario will probably either play third base or DH more often than not. But I think this team, Rick, it's certainly, we talked about this last week, how quickly they got back into the playoff race, and it's obviously been a 500 stint since then, so they haven't played their way back out of it by any stretch of the imagination. They're very much in it. To me, though, I think there's still a right-handed power bat short of maybe being a playoff caliber team. And that's not to say this team can't make the playoffs as it is, but to me, and I think that was the bat that was going to be CES, right? And now that's out the window, it sounds like, for the rest of the season. So I think they need to be wheeling and dealing sooner rather than later to get a right-handed power bat. Again, I'm not giving up the farm for this. It's got to be the right asking price to get the right player. I'm not breaking the bank for this. I don't think you'd have to. I'm not talking Tommy Pham. I don't need to go down that avenue again. But there are probably some guys out there that you can muster a deal for. And I do think they need to do that this time around. Again, I stood by what they did last year at the All-Star or at the trade deadline of kind of standing pat and let's just see what we got in these young guys. I was fine with that. I think now, though, this is the year that you do have to make that deal to add a part that you need. And right now, they desperately need a right-handed hitting power bat.
Yeah, part of the deal last year was we didn't know what they had in some of these guys. To some extent, it was like, well, you're playing with a little bit of house money with the run they're making together, playing well, and we don't know how many of these guys are actually going to stick and be everyday type players going forward. I'm not sure if it makes sense to deal any of them yet or to bury them on the depth chart with new guys you're bringing in. And instead, a year later, okay, we've kind of realized, Fraley and Benson are looking more like platoon guys. They're not looking like necessarily everyday starters. Not that they couldn't do that in a pinch, but they're not wowing you. And some of these other younger guys, we've obviously had the issues with injuries and guys being available. So I agree with you. I think they definitely have to go out and make a move if one is available for them to be made. You mentioned a few things in there that I wanted to bring up. Let's start with Marte because he started that rehab assignment in Louisville on Tuesday. He also spoke to reporters about his suspension, and his quote was, through an interpreter, obviously, "In reality, it just appeared in my system. I really don't know how it came about, unfortunately. That's as far as I know." What a quote, Skinny. What a quote.
I mean, I was told back a couple of months ago, right before the season started, that he honestly didn't know. And I guess you take him at his word, and I think that's where the Reds were a bit blindsided by this.
No, we're not taking him at his word on this. No, we're not. Sorry.
I'm
This,
gonna.
like, you don't just randomly have an anabolic steroid show up in your system and be like, I don't know how it got there. I mean, that's not how that works. It's just
I'm not.
you got to rehearse a better answer than that. Is what I'm saying.
I'm not savvy enough to know how that got into his system and really what the derivative of a steroid it really was. I really don't know the answer to that. So
let me say this then. Even if that is what happened, if that's what he believes, really has no idea, lie and come up with a better story, because this is embarrassing.
Maybe. And listen, I applaud Major League Baseball for trying to take a hardline stance on this, but I do think every case is different. And I think it should be investigated as such. It seemed like in this one, MLB just took a hard line of, you tested positive, it's 80 games, have a good day.
It also feels pretty cut and dry that he was taking steroids, though. I mean, like, I don't understand why you wouldn't suspend a guy for that.
I mean, he tested positive, but again, I was told the same thing, that he literally didn't understand how it got into his system.
Well, I'm going to start using that one with the wife. I don't understand how that happened. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, that's just not a real answer to anything. It's amazing that he thought that. Well, I mean, I guess it did work. And it also helps that you have to have an interpreter deliver that message. So like when people stare back at you funny, you're just like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't speak your language.
As Pete Rose said a few weeks ago, if you remember him sitting in that bar with some random fan and on Twitter reaching over and saying, boy, if I'd have had an interpreter back in the day, I probably would have gotten away with this.
Exactly.
I'd probably be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it does make life easier. I will say that, having that buffer in between. Both Christian Encarnacion-Strand and pitcher Brandon Williamson are considering season-ending surgeries to treat their ailments. CES has been on the injured list since May 8th due to the fractured right hand. Then it was revealed on Tuesday by David Bell that there's also been ligament damage. Williamson has been out since spring training, and it's revealed this week that he has a lesion on his shoulder, which has been causing that shoulder soreness that he's been dealing with. Skinny, 2 weeks ago, we heard CS was cleared, but was seeking a second opinion. Now we hear he might have season-ending surgery and ligament damage. Is it time for the Reds to just put a gag order out on speaking at all on injuries? Like, just shut up and don't say a word?
To some degree, I would say yes. And listen, we all make fun of Marvin. We all made fun of Marvin Lewis, and we kind of now poke fun at Zach Taylor for the way that they handle telling us how long guys are going to be out. And Zach has literally made it a point of, I don't want to put a foot in my mouth by saying it's going to be day to day, week to week, whatever, or put a specific timeline that he'll be back in 3 weeks. And then that guy isn't back in 3 weeks. And it looks like it was a bold-faced lie when that was a best guess. And I'm kind of that ilk too, to some degree, Rick, of you know what, the timeline is what the timeline is.
We don't need to know everything as fans. I know we feel like we do. I know as media, we like demand answers to some extent. But when it comes to things like this, where sometimes there isn't a good answer, or in the CES case, I mean, it almost feels a little bit like he and the team's doctors are at odds to some extent. Of like, they were ready to just put him on the field and let him go 2 weeks ago. And now he's like, no, I'm not going to play it all the rest of the year. I need to get this surgery done now. At least that's the way it seems to be trending. That is a little bit more, I don't know if it's concerning, but it's at least frustrating as a fan, where it seems like there's just constant misinformation put out by David Bell, and the injury turns out to be much more severe down the line. It's like, just tell us nothing at this point. It's honestly pissing me off.
Yeah, I think to your point on CES, that is what it sounds like. Whether it's true or not, it sure seems that way. That, okay, here's the first opinion. No, I need a second one. And honestly, maybe the way this has all gone down, when all is said and done, just go get the surgery. That gives you more time to heal, and you're back, sooner rather than later next season at full strength, as opposed to what you were dealing with early this year, that I do think compromised his playing ability.
I almost feel like I agree with his idea more than the Reds. Like, without even knowing the inside information of what's going on with his wrist and hand, just kind of looking at the way it played out, it's like he tried to come back on it. He was terrible, looked like he couldn't hit at all. And now there appears to be extra ligament damage in there. Why wouldn't you just try to treat your star like a star and make sure he's 100% before he comes back? I mean, I get wanting to push it this year and wanting to stay in contention, and maybe David Bell is worried about keeping his job long-term, but you got to play the long-term game with guys like CES and Ellie and Noelvi Marte.
Yeah, and that's where the right-handed, power bat, the whatever rent a player for the rest of the year would be all about. Just you need that because you don't have CES, and then that guy's, maybe this is the last year of his contract. You're not in the ballpark to resign him. You don't have any plans to resign whoever that guy is. And he walks, and CES is back into that right-handed power bat spot as either the DH or first baseman next year.
You were going through the infield, how you thought it would play out when, they get Marte back. And right now, it's basically been Steer at first base, or at least the last few games. So Steer at first base, Indy at second, Elliott short, Candelario at third. How did you say you would maneuver those guys with Marte coming back?
I think I'd primarily, Marte would play third. He's just a superior defender. And honestly, Candelario has not been very good at first base. So I'm almost thinking of shoving him full-time into the DH role, aside from a day off here and a day off there for guys. Also with Marte, Ellie's gotten very minimal time off, and I think it has affected him a little bit. Marte has played shortstop, can play shortstop. He started a handful of games there last year when he came up. So some days Candelario might be back in the lineup at third with sliding Marte over to shortstop. So I think the rotation of those guys, to be quite frank, will be easy. And I do think Marte will be a big addition to this lineup. It won't be the right-handed power bat, but you had the right-handed power bat with Marte, and remember how much left-handers gave this team fits early in the year. Suddenly you've got a right-handed lineup that can handle left-handed pitching. And, TJ Friedl is a left-handed hitter, but he hits lefties and righties, not completely equally, but he hits them just fine. And suddenly you're not so, oh crap, it's a left-hander. And here comes the Espinal, Maley, name a Luke Martini even having to bat in the lineup as a left-hander. You don't have to do with any of that. You're now putting legitimate right-handed hitters in the lineup.
Yeah, and Steers looked good at first base, honestly.
He's looked really good.
I've been enjoying that.
And that's why, to me, maybe he gets a day off here and there, Steer, sure, and Candelario fills in. But I think really Candelario's primary role for me would be as the DH, both against righties and lefties.
Yeah, in terms of Williamson, Brandon Williamson mentioned the news about his shoulder and him potentially being out for the rest of the year too. That's a bummer, but it's also one that it almost feels like the Reds have moved past that a little bit this year. They've been able to put together a pretty nice pitching staff even without his services.
Yeah, I did think if he had trended, I think I said this on last week's podcast before that injury stuff came up, he was, numbers in Louisville were pretty good, that it felt like he would be the full-time replacement for Graham Ashcraft, and it seemed like a seamless transition. Let Ashcraft go down, work out the kinks, and then let Williamson come up and be the fifth starter. Obviously, that's not going to be the case because of Williamson's issues, and I do think they want Ashcraft to spend a chunk of time in AAA to iron out the kinks, not just send him down there for 2 starts and go, okay, come on back. I mean, it may be by default because of whatever happens in that 2-week period, but I do think they want him to get some stuff straightened out. And maybe Carson Spires now fills that role. I mean, he was good in spring. He was great on Sunday in relief of Montas, and maybe he fills that role now.
Any other thoughts on the Reds before we move on?
No, I think, again, they feel like they're on the cusp, right? It feels like they're another 10-day stretch of good baseball away from very much being not only in the playoff race, but maybe in the divisional race. And this weekend in Milwaukee is really big in that regard. Take 2 or 3 from the Brewers and start feeling really good about yourselves. But to me, Pittsburgh's got that pitching staff that's just, their starting staff is really, really good. I don't know if they're sustainable, but you got to figure that they're now thinking, hey, we're in the playoff mix. Now let's go get some bats to help our pitching staff. Milwaukee's is what it is. I think the sooner you make this deal, whatever that deal would be, the better to get this team moving forward.
I don't know that the Ohio Cup will ever be termed meaningful, but it was fun to actually watch a series between 2 teams and going in the right direction. I mean, Cleveland's obviously been playing really well, but the Reds moving in the right direction, and it was a fun series. I mean, those are 2 good teams. It felt like, right?
It was a very fun series, and it was made even more fun or ludicrous or off the wall with my man running on the field.
Yeah, Sweet Willie. Go grab his shirt at Cincy.
Right now, he's laughing at all of us. I think there's a go. I haven't seen this yet. I was told today by some friends that somebody started a GoFundMe page for him, and he's raking in the dough there.
Don't do that. Don't not give this kid money. Quit encouraging this stuff, people. We do not need more of this. I mean, good for him. Great backflip. Whatever. You got your moment.
So let me wrap that up by this. What is your price point for running onto the field?
Man, for me right now, we've got to be talking $50K. I mean, at least, right? Maybe 100. It's got to be something that's going to move the needle for the year. I mean, buy me a new car or something at least.
I'd consider it for 10. I would.
No way.
I would consider it. I didn't say I'd do it. I'd consider it.
All the hassle you'd have to put up with. I mean, just going to court is such a pain in the ass.
I'm an old man. What are they going to do to me?
No, but just sitting in court all day. You're an old man who would get frustrated at how long they're taking to get through the docket while you're in court that morning.
That is a possibility.
It's like going to the DMV, Skinny. You don't want to put yourself through this if you don't need it.
Can I tell you about the only time I ever had to go to court? It still makes me laugh.
Only
at myself.
Once?
Yeah, only once. That's shocking, I'm sure.
Yeah, I beat you.
I was in my early 20s and I had gotten pulled over and I didn't have my driver's license on me. So they forced me to go to court to show my license. And I dress up in a nice suit and I'm sitting there and I'm looking around at all the vagrants around me and they're all dressed like stumble bums. They're all getting these charges at them. And I'm probably like 10th or 11th. I'm like middle of the docket, I guess it was. I'm just kind of sitting there biding my time. And finally the judge calls for my case and I step forward and he goes, seriously? He goes, do you have your license on you, sir? I said, yes, sir, I do. Show it to the bailiff. I showed it to the bailiff. He goes, get out of here. I'm like, great. That's how the court system should work.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for actually having a decent judge. I had an incident one time, kind of a misunderstanding situation, but I had to go to court for it and show up. And this was right after I had been, or right around the end of my time covering high school sports in Northern Kentucky. And sitting in the same row as me that morning is one of the more prominent Northern Kentucky basketball players I had covered during my career.
Oh my goodness. That was
awkward. He looks over at me and he goes, "You're not here to cover me, are you?" I go, "No, we're in here for the same reason, buddy." And he goes, "All right, don't tweet about this." And I was like, "Trust me, I'd appreciate if you did the same."
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's well done.
It was a great morning. Well, I'll tell you that story another time off the air because
Yes.
I don't want to out that guy without his permission. But let's move on to the Bengals. The Bengals 3-day mandatory minicamp opened Tuesday and runs through Thursday. Joe Burrow this week was kind of the big news as he commented on his, quote, football mortality, Skinny. What was your takeaway from the media session with him? Just that he's going to be taking it easy the rest of the summer?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I thought he opened up in places he doesn't open up, like that quote you just mentioned. I thought that was pretty revealing that here's a guy who I did think he was invincible, like, always outworked people, and he'd work through the pain and he worked through the injuries and he'd work through whatever things he needed to do to get himself in a chance to play. And I think that's what he just thought is I can grit my teeth and get through any of this. And now, well, maybe not so much. And again, I want to caution people. This is a serious wrist injury that this dude suffered. We are not going to know in training, in mini camp practices. He doesn't look like he's throwing it right. Then he's not ripping it at the moment. Even if he was throwing it with some crazy velocity, I still wouldn't even know. You're not going to know until sometime in training camp, and you're either going to know good or bad, I think, at that point. And even then, you're not going to know because he's going to have to eventually fall on that wrist when he gets hit. How does the wrist react to that kind of a stress on it? We just aren't going to know. And I think this has sobered him up a little bit. You remember back when he came back on May 7th, Rick, and I think we all wrote about it. And I know we talked about it on the podcast, him talking about, I need to listen to my body more. When it's, aching here or aching there, I got to just sit out. And he even mentioned, he learned a lesson from trying to fight through the calf injury last year. And I also think there was a part of me, I said, we kind of all talked amongst each other after the press conference about, what'd you think? I said, he came off as feeling like he's a little sad about this because I think it is a little bit of fear of the unknown for him. And even though he's come back from injuries and you don't know fully how you're going to come back, plenty of dudes have come back from ACL, right? He came back from an appendicitis and it wasn't good. I mean, it burst on him. It wasn't good at one point, but people come back from that. And he certainly came back from that. Came back from the throat injury. He's come back from, he even really came back from the calf strain even last year. So he's come back from all of those. But this, I think, is really an unknown territory for him. And I think he's a little nervous about it. And I get it.
The one thing I think everybody kind of finds out when they hit a certain level of fame or prominence in their career or whatever is that you don't necessarily get to control the narrative around you, but that narrative that's out there can become real at times. And Joe Burrow has heard nothing but, well, he's heard a lot of positives about him, obviously, since he started his career, and people are still talking about him as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But since that he went down with that injury last year, there's all of a sudden been a whole nother group of media people and hot takers out there who are constantly putting out the narrative of, is Joe Burrow injury prone? Is he never, is he going to be a guy who can never get back to taking his team to a Super Bowl like he did in his first couple of years? There's all those types of narratives out there all of a sudden. And I think, sitting out, getting bored, not a lot to do as you're rehabbing it probably starts to weigh on your mind to some extent. And you start realizing and there's some real sentiment out there that people feel like I'm never going to be the same, or if I'm get hurt again, even if I'm doing all the right things and I'm showing how tough I am and how well I recovered from the previous injury, if I get hurt again, it's going to be a negative. It's going to be used against me. No one's going to look at how tough I was to get back and play through that injury. And I think that's starting to become real to him, and he's starting to think about it more. It's either that or Joe Burrow is just, he's so ahead of all of us from a maturity standpoint and like where his mind is at, that he's like, you know what, you guys need these quotes. You guys need to hear this for your own sake because you're going to keep annoying us about it. So I'm just going to give you what you need. It's one of the two. I'm not entirely sure which it is. I feel like it's the former, but I'm not entirely convinced it's not the latter too.
I did like him sharing that he's learning to play the piano off of YouTube videos.
Did that not feel a little intentional too? Of like,
well, another reporter after the press conference, I guess, ran into him real quick and asked him a quick question about it and shared it with us, that I guess the piano playing is part of the rehab process. So he's using that as part of the rehab for it. But I did like that he said he knows he knows a couple songs. You know what? We all know a couple songs on the piano, right? We all can play chopsticks. And we all can play hot cross buns. We can play both. We all
he's down there with one finger doing three blind mice.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You start playing some like Billy Joel piano riff for me, Joe, then I'm going to believe you've learned to play the piano.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a big social media guy, but we're going to need like a real social media video playing something legit before we're going to believe this piano thing. But I thought for sure, like when he said the piano bit, I was like, this has to be him just being like, yeah, the wrist is fine. The dexterity is there. I'm able to full use of everything. It almost felt like he was, talking to the fans directly when he said that. Another big piece of information surrounding the Bengals this week was Trent Brown showing up for voluntary OTAs. He didn't show up for voluntary ACE. He did show up for mandatory minicamp on Tuesday, and he also offered an explanation for his previous absence from the OTA, saying he had family emergencies that forced him to stay back. And then he also mentioned that he had zoomed in for the meetings that the team had during that time that he missed. What do you think everything's good with Trent Brown?
I do, and I say this because he had scheduled an interview with our television station at Local 12 during that one of the voluntary period weeks, and he had to cancel. And I'm guessing family emergency is going to force you to cancel. Then it obviously forced him to miss some time. I got to tell you, man, he is immense. He's listed at 380. I mean, that's his official listed weight at 380. I'm not sure I'm buying that. I'm buying 4 bills-ish.
What's the difference at that point?
You're right. No, exactly. And I did like the package that they put in. It's a 2 right tackle package. I guess one of those is the extra tight end with him and Amarius Mims lined up side by side. I know some people talked about him repping at guard. That was actually him as a tackle with an extra tackle out there, an extra tackle eligible. Can you imagine on a 3rd and 1 running right behind those 2 dudes?
I like the idea of it. I always think with football, how does something like that not work?
Right.
But then you rarely see teams actually go to something like that or use it effectively. So it's like, well, maybe there's a reason they don't. But sometimes at the goal line, you see them bring in like a defensive tackle as a fullback, and that does prove effective.
Right.
So I would love to see it.
It would certainly be interesting for sure. I did. Zach Taylor was kind of asked about that in a way today. Today wrapped up the mini camp. We're doing this on a Thursday, and I'm doing it after the mini camp wrap up. And he said, I now look at guys who I used to think were big who don't look as big. He said, I have a whole new respect for just what those guys are size wise. And they are just immense human beings.
Has anyone else or anything else stood out to you from minicamp?
The only thing was, and I asked Zach today about Dax Hill's progress. I know they hate when we do this, and so we have to couch it. We're not supposed to say, here's who the first team offensive line was, or here's who the first team whatever was. So I always couch it with, here are the guys that lined up first on defense when they went to the 7-on-7 sessions. And it was Dax Hill at outside cornerback instead of DJ Turner. And I do think that's a training camp battle that is on. But I would say, based on him running with the ones, if you will, that Dax starts training camp as a starting outside corner.
What is your thought about that? I mean, what's the takeaway there?
Well, I mean, he talked in glowing terms about the progress he's made, how good he's looked out there. And, I've had some people suggest to me, well, boy, the Bengals really screwed up by trying to move him to safety. I don't think they did. They had a plan. And, the first year he didn't get a chance to play there much because the 2 safeties, God love them, Jesse Bates, Von Bell, were extraordinarily durable and never came off the field. And then last year, I think he was really hampered by the fact that Von Bell leaving left them in a lurch to where they had to go get Nick Scott, not familiar with the system, didn't play very well. And then when it wasn't him, it was safety. It was rookie Jordan Battle playing the other safety spot, and he's just a rookie. And suddenly you got two guys back there going, what are we supposed to do? Well, I don't know what we're supposed to, how to, and so I think it really hurt him. And maybe now settle him in at this spot, and he's a full-time outside corner the rest of his career, perhaps.
Well, it's interesting you bring him up because one of the other things I had listed here was a story from Bleacher Report where the writer had the title of the piece was 7 disappointing NFL players who need to prove themselves at 2024 training camp. Out of the 7 players he chose, one of them was Dax Hill from the Bengals. And the write-up said, on one hand, Hill was disappointing last season. On the other, the move to cornerback isn't a death knell for his career. He spent the majority of his snaps in his final season at Michigan in the slot. That's a role that Mike Hilton has traditionally played, but Hill could establish himself as the slot defender of the future if he's able to put together a strong camp. I mean, it's interesting coupling that with what you just said about him looking good and kind of being, quote unquote, the first guy out there in that cornerback position. Do you think he's on the hot seat, or do you think he's good?
No, I think the position of last resort for him, if this doesn't work out on the outside, is them grooming him to replace Mike Hilton in the slot. I actually thought that's kind of was going to be the thing for this year. And I did think they were going to go get a veteran. I still think that's on the table to go get a veteran for depth. I really thought it was going to be DJ Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt on the outside, and then Mike Hilton as the slot guy with Dax rolling in there to give Mike Hilton some breathers. But the fact that they've moved him literally solely to outside corner and he's running with the ones, that seems to be what their future plan is for him. And so if it doesn't fully work out on the outside, I do think the position of last resort, because next year will be the final year of his rookie contract, 2025, would be to see what he looks like as a slot corner. And, I hope it doesn't take them to come to that. I hope it works out for him on the outside. And I think it can. I mean, he's long, he's athletic. He's played corner. He's played it obviously inside and not outside. But this has been in the works, I think, really since the season ended. I remember Lou Anarumo back at the combine said, we're going to have him do one thing and learn one thing and see if he can master that. And I think for them, it was the possibility of grooming slot corner, but then they decided, nope, let's see what we got at outside corner. And I don't know if this is an indictment on DJ Turner or it says more about Dax quickly taking the role of maybe being the starter there.
I've got another thing I want to bring up. I need to bring up video here, though.
Sure.
Give me a second here. This is from our buddy Paul Dehner's podcast, along with Jay Morrison. Paul had an interesting take on
but here's
Miles Murphy.
I am so in on Miles Murphy.
Yeah,
I think he is going to become a dude. I think he's going to have more sacks this year than Sam Hubbard had at any year of his career. I am so in on Miles. I like the statistical.
Sorry, we're skipping around here.
Yeah.
I think he is going to become a dude. I think he's going to have more sacks this year than Sam Hubbard had at any year of his career. I think that Miles Murphy is going to have at least 9 sacks this year. There's my hot take. Here's my June 10 hot take. Miles Murphy will have 9. I should just say double digit to make it sound cooler. I think Miles Murphy has double digit sacks this year.
Wow.
I think he's going to have a huge year. I think they're going to find snaps for him in as many passing situations as possible. I think Trey and Sam will probably get banged up at some point because guys do.
Yep.
And you'll see even more reps for Miles Murphy. I think he'll earn it. I am in. Maybe I'm off. I just feel like we saw it start to happen for him last year, and he's got every physical trait, and they are dedicated to finding snaps for him. And I think there will probably be some injury because it always is the case. And so I'm in on Murphy. So I'm running with Murphy. I'm booting Higgins, and I am going to pass on Yoshi.
Okay, so that was one of the run, pass, or boot questions. Yeah. Go and check out the podcast. It was actually a really good question. It was basically about those 3 guys, Higgins, Yoshavash, and Murphy. Out of the 3 of them, which has the best chance to double or triple a specific stat for each of them? So it was a good question. Go back and they had a long answer to it. But that little piece there with Paul Dehner waxing poetic on what he expects out of Miles Murphy this upcoming season. I've heard some positive things about Miles Murphy. This was by far the highest form of praise I've heard for him. Where do you come out on what Paul Dehner just said?
Yeah, I like Miles Murphy a lot. I thought he got much better as last year went on. They started trusting him with more and more snaps. And Lou Anarumo has talked of these terms of both because we had a lot of questions as the year went on about, why is Miles not playing more? And some of it is you got Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard out there. But, you didn't draft this guy in the first round to force him to sit. And he's always used the analogy of he doesn't like playing rookie corners because they're going to make mistakes. And he said rookie pass rushers are kind of the same way. They aren't right where they need to be as rookies. And that's why, you just don't see guys take the league by storm a lot of times. And so I don't think he was completely comfortable in playing him a ton of snaps until the season got along. And I do think Miles came along very nicely. He finished with 3.5 sacks, which I believe was actually fourth on this team and not a ton of playing time. I do think the thing to watch in camp for me, and I said this last year and it didn't come to fruition, I do think it does this year. I do think there'll be more of a rotation for starters. I think you'll see him take some snaps off of Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson on some early downs. And I think that's part of the plan here is to get a full rotation across the board and to keep defensive linemen more fresh. And, BJ Hill's played way more snaps than they've wanted to play. Well, they can take that off of him now with Chris Jenkins being around and McKinley Jackson being around. But I am so interested to see a pass rushing group that would have Trey Hendrickson on one end, Miles Murphy on the other, Sam Hubbard inside, and Sheldon Rankins inside, and maybe even float some Joseph Osai inside as well. I'd love to see what that looks like. And I don't know if I'm ready to go complete double-digit sacks for Miles Murphy, but the take of having more than Sam Hubbard, I can buy that. I can truly buy that.
More than Sam Hubbard in any year of his career, I believe he said, right?
Yeah, I can buy that. I think I can buy that.
What is the high for Sam? Do we know?
I think 8.5. I think.
8? Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah. So not that I feel too strongly either way. It was just interesting to me. I don't get to see a whole lot of Miles Murphy aside from what we saw on Sundays on the field last year. And I like to be optimistic and excited about what he can bring, but I certainly didn't feel as strongly about it as Paul just was there in that clip that you heard. So I don't know. It was interesting to hear that from Paul, I guess is what I'm saying. And it definitely stood out to me. So I was curious to see where you stood on that, but it seems like you're pretty in line with Paul here.
Yeah, no, I again, the progress he made last year was the thing that was positive to me. And I know 3.5 sacks doesn't sound like a lot, but again, he didn't have a ton of snaps. And I thought he popped a few times as the year progressed. And I just think more opportunity for him is going to lead to more production for him. And I think that whole thing on the defensive line is a real thing of, he doesn't want to play BJ Hill as much as he has, but guess what he had to do? He had to play BJ Hill because Zach Carter wasn't the answer. And so now you've almost, with Murphy taking snaps off of both, you've almost got a full rotation inside and really at the end spot as well, and kind of a 3-man rotation. I think that's an extreme positive. It's what the Eagles have tried to do, right? They've tried to almost have 2 foot. The one time where they have 6 legitimate dudes on defense and drafted 2 more. You're like, what do they do? Well, they've got 2 full rotational pieces at a spot where I think of all spots in the league that wear down over the course of a game, it probably is defensive linemen. And now you got a chance to give those guys a breather.
Skinny is 2 guys who do a weekly podcast and have to fill content throughout the summer. You hit this time of year where it really slows down for all sports, and it becomes what I call summer superlative time, or maybe it's rankings time, or it's Mount Rushmore time. But that's when you come out with all these kind of lists of these are the most underappreciated players in the NFL, which is the title for the next piece that I want to bring up from NFL.com's Gennaro Felice. He wrote a piece titled "NFL's Most Underappreciated Players," and his pick for the Bengals was second-year running back Chase Brown. Here's what he had to say about Brown. Over the final 6 weeks of last season, Brown showcased his ability as a rusher receiver, piling up 173 yards on the ground and 149 through the air, including a 54-yard catch-and-run touchdown. He displayed nice burst and tackle-breaking ability, bringing some much-needed juice to the Bengals' backfield. In March, Cincinnati traded Mixon to Houston and signed veteran back Zach Moss. While Moss could start the 2024 campaign as Cincy's early down goal line hammer, I expect Brown to continue making his mark as a versatile playmaker, and don't be surprised if he increasingly takes over the timeshare. Your thoughts on Chase Brown as the Bengals' most underappreciated player?
Yeah, I'd have to take a deeper dive, but that's probably fair. I do think he's got a chance to take the biggest step forward of maybe anybody, and that includes the guy we just talked about, Miles Murphy, because even today, Zach was asked about Chase, and one of the things he was asked to do between the end of last season and maybe as they get into camp is improve as a pass catcher. And Zach actually smiled when he was given this answer of, you could just see he took that one little thing we said and how much he worked on that and how much better he is at that. Well, if you do that, you know what you earn? You earn the more and more trust of your coaches, that they asked you to do something, and Joe Burrow. They asked you to do something. You went and did it. You flashed when you've gotten the opportunity. I do think last year was a little wonky for him because right about the time they were ready to use him a little bit more, he got hurt and missed a handful of weeks, and then it took him a little more time to get up to speed and all of those things. But yeah, I think my one fear for Chase Brown is, I mean, he didn't practice yesterday. I think he was on the field, but he came in late because he was rehabbing. They don't have to tell us what the injury situation is right now. It's not league mandated, so I don't know what it is. I just fear that body type at that position. I hope he's not that guy. And maybe they have ways to use him to not even take that normal tackle to tackle pounding, that you really do try to get him in space, create some things. Now, he's going to have to be a running back at times, right? He's going to have to run in between the tackles. He's going to have to be a pass blocker. He's going to have to, take part in some of that physicality. But man, him in space, I think he's got a chance to just be dynamic, and he showed that at times last year.
Yeah, he seems like a weapon. He was fun to watch when he got the opportunities last year. And to be clear, I understand how silly most of these lists and these write-ups are when I'm looking through them. But when you're looking for something to talk about this time of year, I like to see people come up with these claims and then pose it to a guy like you who's actually in the locker room and seeing these guys every day. It's like, is this completely out in left field, or is this something that seems somewhat reasonable? So that's the reason I usually bring these types of things up when we're doing the show. And, Chase Brown is one that I'm looking forward to watching this year. I would say he and Myles Murphy are probably top of the list for guys that like you really want to see this year. It feels like their careers could go either way based off what happens in the coming season.
Yeah, and Andrei Iosivas a little bit too. I mean, I've heard nothing but praise from him. He made a heck of a catch on Wednesday's practice along the sidelines. It was just a ridiculous snag. And when Joe Burrow names you by name in a press conference like he did, you go back to what you talked about. If you earn his trust, you're in the inner circle. See Hudson, Tanner. I mean, that dude was a nobody until he started making plays for Joe Burrow. And I trust you. Guess who stopped earning that trust and got out of the lineup was Irv Smith, right? I mean, Trenton Irwin is here only. You know what? Trenton Irwin's here. I think he's a plucky little guy. He earned Joe Burrow's trust.
Yeah, Joe Burrow believes in him.
Yeah, correct. And if he starts believing in Andrei Iosivas like that, that might be one of the unsung guys going into this next season.
It feels almost like a Julian Edelman situation with the Patriots, where it's like you look at him and who knows what he's actually going to be. But if Joe Burrow likes him and he actually does have some measurables and some physical tools to work with, you could end up with something special there long term. You never know. All right, let's switch gears one more time here to the NBA Finals before we get to Ask anything. Celtics up 3-0. The series is over. I was expecting a good series, and instead Luka went from looking like the best player in the world to the overweight parking cone on defense that he should be based on his current conditioning and size right now. What happened here, Skinny? This series sucks.
Yeah, I'm obviously not there, neither you, but I've watched things, listened to things. So right after they won the Western Conference Finals, I can't remember who it was. It was a former player, talking head now, that was talking about, Luka shouldn't be drinking beers and kind of half celebrating this stuff. And I went, oh, shut up. I mean, he's a grown adult. He can drink some beers and he'll be okay. But I'll be honest, Rick, since this whole finals started, it's almost like he thought winning the Western Conference was enough, that this didn't matter. I mean, some of the clips that have gone viral of him, like walking back on defense and not hustling on a closeout and just kind of looking like he's given up. And then the two dumb fouls, especially the last foul, you can argue whether they were good calls or not. That part's fine. But you can't put yourself in a position when you got 5 fouls to do something that stupid at that juncture of the game. It's almost like you literally don't care.
He's totally disinterested. I mean, his body language, his reactions to things, the way he's treating refs and his teammates, and the just everything. And I understand when you're really good and you kind of have this FU attitude towards everybody, it becomes your persona, and you play into that when you're on the floor. Jordan did that. Kobe did that. I get that. But
they did that grit in their teeth and figuring out, I'm going to find a way to beat your ass.
Exactly. And this feels, it's not a determination thing with him right now. It's almost like I'm too good for this. I don't care. I'll do what I want, and I'll bitch at everybody along the way. I don't know. It's very strange, sort of the attitude he's had. And maybe it's just because the games haven't gone their way, but game 3 was still in question. I mean, if they're making one of the best comebacks you've ever seen in the fourth quarter of that game. If he stays on the floor for the final few minutes, they might come all the way back and win it at home. And instead he's on the bench and he's bitching at the refs still. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like, one, you're just completely out of shape. I mean, it was fine when you won the Western Conference Finals and I was able to be like, you're going to be my favorite player ever if you win a title being that fat. But when you really can't guard anybody and you're acting like you don't care, people are going to start to question how much you're putting into the offseason and your conditioning and all those types of things. And it's understandable.
He is totally that guy, and I've coached that guy, and you've seen that guy, that when things aren't going well for him on the offensive end, he has no interest in playing defense. When things are going well on offense, he's willing to at least try sometimes on defense, and that's usually enough. You go, hey, his offense is going to offset what he does. But right now, he is literally a hindrance on the other end of the floor.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's not even a thing where at least like the IQ's there and he's rotating a little bit and calling things out. It's just basically he's waving at the first dribble, letting the guy go by, and then he's starting moving out towards half court.
I guess I don't understand why the disinterest in it. Was it really the shock of game one where the Celtics just came out and punched them right in the face of, we're not as good as these guys. It's not going to matter what I do. To hell with it. That's what it looks like.
It feels that way because he was a different player the last two series, and maybe it's because the competition was easier, and that's fine. But it just, the determination, the sort of, like you said, the grit of, I'm going to get through this, and I'm a pain in the ass, but I'm motivated and I'm driven and all that stuff. It's just not there. It's like he's kind of a clown all of a sudden. He's the hot-headed guy who's losing his cool every other possession. And I don't know. It's been a very weird series to watch because I really thought that we were going to get a good one. And I thought the Celtics were better. I thought the Mavs had the two best players and they were hot and I was going to carry them. But it turns out the Celtics are far and away the better team, and they're just dominating them at times. I mean, the Mavs have had their good segments of basketball where they run off 15 in a row or whatever, but overall, the Celtics have like dominated the pace of play and controlled the game in all three games.
I heard a great quote from a high school coach yesterday. We were playing summer league games, and I'm not going to call out the school, but the player that was being coached on the other team was a really good player. He was a Kentucky Junior All-Star, and just watching him, you could tell, I'm like, boy, this guy, I was watching him, this guy's really good. And we actually had a kid that did a really good job on him defensively. He was kind of physical with him and all those things. And he was complaining about a lot of calls, and his coach said, Bub, they weren't listening. The referees weren't listening to you from the beginning. You think they're listening to you now? You've complained about every call. Stop complaining. And I'm thinking, that's the Luka. That's somebody needs to say that to Luka.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be nice. A lot of NBA players need to hear it, but he's as bad as it gets. I had one other question about this. The broadcasting crew. Right now we've got Mike Breen, Doris Burke, JJ Redick on the call for the finals.
Okay, I can't hear him. Can you because the noise is over them?
Okay, so I'm fine with all three of these people individually.
I am too.
For some reason, I think the call has been off, and maybe I always go back to this. I think the 3-man booth is terrible. I don't think there's any advantages to having three people in the booth at the same time. It makes everything awkward. Obviously, this crew hasn't worked together a lot yet, so it's hard for them to build their chemistry like this. But what has been your thoughts on the broadcast so far?
Well, I miss Jeff Van Gundy. I will tell you that right now. I thought he was just fat. I really did. I think he was fabulous. Not Stan. I like Stan too. I think Stan's okay, but I love Jeff Van Gundy. I just think he was so good at it. And to your point, I like Doris Burke, right? I mean, I do. I think she knows the game and she's articulate but you're right. The chemistry isn't there. And to your point, three is one too many, in my opinion. You're going to hate me for saying this. I would rather actually, and probably more so, high school basketball than broadcasting college basketball. In high school, I don't even want to color now. I can do this. This is not TV really. I'm talking about doing radio. There's no long timeouts usually. You don't have regular breaks. I don't need that person. It's usually just more of a hindrance that you make your call. And the game now is just so doggone fast paced that sometimes you don't even have a chance to give your analysis. I do think in college it's a little bit different. And I say this sincerely, I think you do a terrific job. But yeah, so sometimes to me, radio, even an analyst is one too much. On TV, two analysts are one too much.
I couldn't agree more. And I would tell you, Jim Kelch and I we talk about our broadcast constantly because we both love doing it. We're nerds about it. We want it to be as good as possible. And the thing I'm constantly telling him is like, let me know if I need to back off more. Like when I hear radio analysts on the radio, when I hear analysts on the radio, it's constantly feels like they're talking too much. They're in between every play and they're breaking up the rhythm of a play-by-play guy. The play-by-play guy is the star usually, especially on the radio. He's the star. He's got the sound. He's got the voice. Let him get into his rhythm so the listener can really appreciate that and sort of get in sync with the flow of the game and the call. And then if you have a really good insight, something that's going to add something to it, then come in with that. And it feels like partially having the two analysts, they probably are like, is it my turn or is it their turn to get in with this thing? And what it ends up happening is I think they feel like I've just got to go when it's my turn. She said something last time, so it's my turn this time. And they don't always say something when they have something good to say. They just say something because it feels like it's my turn. And like JJ Redick is an incredibly intelligent basketball mind. His podcast is phenomenal. I haven't loved him on these NBA Finals games. And I've heard him in other broadcasts where I think he's done a good job, but it just feels like he hasn't picked up the flow yet. And I think that's part of just experience. Like, it's not as easy as everyone thinks to just be plugged into a broadcast and say insightful, timely things every time you get the opportunity to.
Yeah, it's okay. He's only the 23rd choice for Lakers head coach, but I think he's going to be the Lakers head coach. So he's got that going for him.
Well, that's kind of the thing out in LA, right? That's what UCLA did with Mick Cronin.
That's right. Yeah.
Just get down the list and eventually you hire someone.
Yep. You cross him off and all right, here we are. We're to this guy.
All right, let's get in some Ask Skinny Anything. We had a big question we're going to table for another week.
And I do appreciate the question. Yeah, it's been a busy week for me between covering Bengals minicamp and coaching high school basketball. So I had to, I want to let it marinate. I promise I will get to it because it was a really good question.
So shout out to our guy, Dan. We will get to that next week. And he has another question on here that you'll appreciate because it couldn't be any more polar opposite from the question that you're going to answer next week. But we'll start with this. Should the Reds and Bengals play each other in basketball like they used to back in the day?
The problem with that is there's so many multi-million-dollar players out there. You don't want to risk an injury.
So when did this happen and when did it stop? Do you remember?
I don't know when it stopped. I know when it became kind of a thing for the Reds tonight. The Reds used to have kind of a little barnstorming team in the summer. You probably won't remember him. He was on the early Big Red Machine teams. A guy named Bobby Tolan who tore his Achilles tendon. He tore his Achilles tendon. Playing in a basketball game and basically cost himself a season. And I think that's at the point. And I think probably Rick, it probably just kind of organically filtered out when the contracts got so big. It was almost like, A, we don't need, because listen, I'm sure they got a chunk of the change from those little barnstorming things back in the day. For them, it's now, A, we don't need the money, and B, we can't risk injury. I got to tell you, I played in one of those like charity games I'm probably 40, 42 years old. And Kewan Ratliff, you remember him for the Bengals?
Yeah.
He was playing on
returner.
He was playing on the other team, and I swear I was coming up the floor and I saw what I thought was an easy chance to punch a pass ahead, kind of cross court angle, and I stepped to throw it, and as soon as it left my hands, I looked and this blur comes out of nowhere. I'm like, uh-oh. He picks that thing off. I've never seen anybody move so quick. So I mean, some of those dudes are legit hoop players, man.
Oh, they're good athletes. That's
they're
shocking.
just great athletes. Well, but sometimes, I mean, like some of those offensive linemen aren't going to be great basketball. Maybe they were just big and played down on the block and took up space. Like in that the Logan Wilson celebrity softball game, I was told, the star hitter of that was.
Well, I don't know, but I saw Amarius Mims hit one out one-handed with the worst swing ever, and he hit about 400 feet still.
Well, a lot of those offensive linemen apparently didn't have good swings, but Evan McPherson, the kicker.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, he looks like a guy who played baseball.
Yeah, he looks like a little athlete. In fact, when I was talking to him today, he was watching the U.S. Open. We were sharing U.S. Open stories of guys we liked and whatnot. So, no,
Could you imagine Ellie De La Cruz tearing an ACL because he was trying to guard Dax Hill?
Yes, correct. Would it be fun to see it? Sure. Will it ever happen again? Absolutely not.
Who's the matchup that you'd most want to see between those teams right now? Like a one-on-one guy guarding each other?
Burrow was a good high school basketball player. Burrow versus, I'm trying to think who, Luke Maley.
Oh, Maley was a good high school basketball player.
Maley was a good high school basketball player.
Yeah. Big, strong guy, little athleticism.
They're
Burrow
about the same size.
though.
They're probably both I think they're both about 6'4", right?
I think Burrow's probably an inch or two taller, maybe.
Yeah, maybe
I think Maley was listed at like 6'4", 6'5", is probably more like 6'3". I feel like Burrow's probably
but
more.
there's not a huge difference there.
No, not a big difference.
I would think Burrow would be a little harder for Maley to guard out in space, but Maley may be able to muscle Burrow under the rim.
I don't know. You're muscling Joe Burrow a lot. That's the problem. I think Burrow has the combination of athleticism and brawn. Maley's a little bit more brawn at this point.
But I can't think of another matchup that I'd like to see.
That would be fun, actually. People are going to hate that we said Luke Maley, but they don't know. They haven't seen Luke Maley, the athlete. Luke Maley was a good all-around athlete.
Yeah, you and I did.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, where does UK making the College World Series rank on Skinny's list of best UK wins across all UK sports, since he is an alum and once tried to make Keith Madison's UK squad back in the day?
I would say the 78 national championship team was probably first for me because it was the first one I saw growing up. And I actually went to the regional tournament that year with my dad up in Dayton. So we saw, actually, they beat Magic Johnson, freshman Magic Johnson of Michigan State in the regional final. That's the one for me. This is probably number 2 on that list. I mean, I literally stayed up to watch that whole game on Sunday night, and my wife stayed up with me. Actually, I had fallen asleep like around 8:00 at night, and I woke up. I missed maybe the first couple innings. She's sitting on her chair and goes, I'm going to watch the game out here. I said, yeah, I'm just going to stay out here in the living room too and watch it. So we stayed out, watched the whole thing. So I don't know if you saw the end of it. Kid came out of the bullpen with the tying run on third, throws 3 off-speed pitches, and the third one looks like it just floats in, right? It's an 0-2 count. Probably got way too much of the plate, but it was one that just totally froze the batter. And I swear it felt like it took the umpire a year to make the called strike 3. And when he did, I literally went, whoa! I mean, I was genuinely excited. It was.
When's the last time you did that to a sporting event?
I don't know.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. Yes. Now, maybe one I've coached, I've done, but but nothing as a fan. So yeah, that would be number 2. The Kentucky win over LSU the year they were number 1 in the country and came to Commonwealth Stadium, and they actually beat them in overtime. They stopped Jacob Hester on a 4th and 1 run. I mean, it was just a great comment. It's like, you've seen Kentucky lose those games 1,000 times, and they end up stoning a guy on a 4th and 1. That was a walk-off tackle, if you will. But yeah, I would say this is number 2 behind the 78 national championship team.
All right, here's another good one. Please rank the following Burlington area Krogers: Burlington, Hebron, Florence, and Oak Brook. Have you been to all of them?
I've not been. I've been to the one in Hebron, not very often. The one in Oak Brook is my go-to, and that's the one closest to me. It's within a 2-minute drive of my house. So that's probably the one in. Did he say Union?
Burlington and Florence were the other 2. I don't know.
Yeah, the Florence one's been upgraded, but I don't go to that one. I don't think I'm not even
that's
sure.
The one on Mall Road?
Yeah, the one on Mall Road.
Okay, yeah, no one goes to that.
Well, it's funny. That's where we get the end of month Kroger gas is always at that one because it's kind of a meeting spot for the entire family to go to. So that's
the gas makes sense, but no one shops inside that Kroger unless you're like in apartments there, I would assume.
Yeah, no. My go-to clearly is the one in Burlington.
Okay,
it's good when it's
Oak
good
Brook, you said, right?
Or Oak Brook, brother. I'm sorry. Yeah. No,
so Oak Brook number 1.
Yeah.
Burlington number 2.
It's where the folks in the liquor store there know me by sight.
There we go.
Yeah. So,
hey, Chief.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. This is from Dan again, and we'll address his more sophisticated question next week. But here's his other question. We'll end on this, Skinny. Can you die from a fart?
So I had a friend of mine's father who suffered a stroke while going number 2.
What?
He had to squeeze so hard that it caused him to have a stroke.
I'm trying to be sensitive.
I know that. He's okay. He was okay.
So he survived that.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so
if you're
I have questions.
So if you're trying to squeeze one out and you put a little undue pressure on yourself,
don't push too hard.
Right.
Don't push too hard. I'm going to assume he had some other issues going on, some other health issues I don't
know. I don't know. I just know that my man had a stroke going number 2.
Was he a big guy?
Nope.
He was not a big guy. All right, That's concerning then. I'm going to make sure I eat my fiber and drink enough fluids.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to get pushing too hard.
So does he have like statistical proof that someone has suffered that consequence?
With Dan, he probably already knows the answers to all the questions he asks us. He just likes to hear how stupidly we can answer them.
Okay.
But I did look up, I Googled this really quick before we came on air just to have a little bit of history behind me. And I did see that now I have no idea if this is actually true, but someone on a Reddit thread said that they were watching 1,000 Ways to Die one time. And there was an episode where a guy had kidnapped a girl. I think it was like a prank, but they had kidnapped someone, like tied them up, had a thing over their head, and they farted into the cloth over their head and like sort of sealed back up. And the person started vomiting and choked on their own vomit.
Oh, okay. All right. That's
so. And that way, I guess you could die from farting. Or I think we've nailed the 2 easiest ways to die from farting, which is causing someone to vomit and then choke on their own vomit, or dying from too much pressure from pushing too hard and then you stroke out.
Exactly. So can it happen? Sounds like it can.
I'd say it's probably a 99.9% chance it doesn't happen, but Save that 0.01%. Good.
Yeah, I don't want to be that 0.01% for sure.
No,
Be a bad way to go.
no,
Without
that's all we
question.
got.
All right, that's all we got. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. Thanks for being with us. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the Attorney Maisland.